Hate Week is here. We preview Iowa State, the CyHawk rivalry. We get into the matchup today. Locked on Hawkeyes.
You are Locked on Hawkeyes, your daily podcast on the Iowa Hawkeyes. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Trent Condon, and this is the Locked on Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked on Hawkeyes your first listen every day. We're available wherever you get podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube. While you're there, hit that subscribe button. Let's push those numbers up. Let's see if we can get this thing up north of 2,500 by the time we get through this weekend. It is a rivalry week. It is a big one. We come to you every single day, your team every day. That's what we do on the Locked On Network. Well, it's time to turn our page forward from what we saw last week against Utah State and start to get ready for the matchup against Iowa State, a game that Iowa comes into as a 4-point favorite in the matchup. You can find that line over at FanDuel. Iowa, a 4-point favorite, the over-under sitting at 36.5, and it's expected to be low scoring, but it's crazy how quickly things can flip. And it's not so much the overreaction to what we saw a week ago for Iowa in their win against Utah State and Iowa State cruising against UNI. Though that is a piece of it, it's just looking at the way that this game is set up and the matchup and some of the things to look for. And that's what we're going to do here today. We are going to look forward and anticipate what we look like we are going to say coming up on 2:30 on Saturday afternoon against the Cyclones. So first I mentioned the win against UNI for Iowa State. I very much believe that UNI had a real opportunity to not only keep that football game close, but win the football game. And it just didn't play out. From the opening interception return for a touchdown from Iowa State, they got a big return after that, set up their next score. They're cruising 14-0 and really completely changed the complexion of that football game. UNI was bringing in 4 new offensive line starters, and it showed up. The defensive front was really, really good for Iowa State. Needham, he's a guy that you're going to have to know. Dominic Orange in the middle, 2 guys that are big-time disruptors. They got Peterson on the other side. I mean, they got guys up front that can make plays. And though they play a different kind of look than what Iowa is used to defensively with that 3-3-5 stack that they play, they got a bunch of defensive backs out there. They also tackle incredibly well. Now, when you look at this Iowa State defense, you have to start with what they do with their defensive coordinator and John Haycock. The guy, he's a wizard, and we love to talk about the merits of Phil Parker, and they are much deserved. But John Haycock does not take a backseat to anybody. This is a guy that changed the way defenses are played in the Big 12. For years and years, it was talking about backyard football, and they're not playing a real brand of football. They just chuck the ball around all the time. The games take 4 hours. They stink, and they can't play a lick of defense, and nobody can tackle. And John Haycock changed that. And not only changed that in the way the defenses play against the spread attacks that are employed pretty much across the board in the Big 12, but teams from across the country went to John Haycock and find out what he was doing to slow down spread offenses. Not only college programs, but NFL programs are making that phone call, are making the way to Ames to figure it out. He's really good. And his defense is really good again this season. So that's where you start with this matchup. And after what we saw from Iowa on Saturday, the inability to run the football, the opportunities that were left out there on the field. Look, Iowa doesn't have to play perfect to win this football game, but they have to play much cleaner than what they saw on Saturday. And if you're of the belief that the old adage, you make your biggest leap between week 1 and week 2, I think you feel pretty good that they're going to clean up the running game, that the offensive line is going to be better in the run game, the pass protection is going to continue, and everything's going to be all right. And I'm fine with you going down that line of thinking. However, that is an adage that statistically is not true. I talked to my friend Mike Palm, the vice president of operations out at Circa in Las Vegas, and he mentioned that misnomer when I brought it up to him. And he said, well, you're not alone in that line of thinking. However, statistically, at least, it's not true. When you look at a way a team improves on the statistical, on the sabermetric element of things, that's actually not the case. It's something easy to say. It's something us media dorks may like to throw out there, but statistically, it's not backed up. Now, I believe you are going to see growth out of this team. And Kirk Ferentz mentioned some of the defensive things that Utah State did that they were not ready for, that they just were not anticipating that they were going to see last Saturday. But you got to be ready against this Iowa State defense, and they can hurt you in a myriad of different ways. They're really talented. They're really good, and they're going to be good on that side of the football. So we start right there, and it leads us to believe that this is probably going to be a low-scoring game. You also look at last week in Iowa State, what they put on the board, putting 30 up. You think, all right, pretty good. Had a missed extra point, wasn't on the kicker. It was a bad snap that led to that. But they put scores up against a pretty good UNI defense. They did it, though, with the pick six, with a short field on a big kick return. In fact, Iowa State only ran 48 offensive plays last week. That is incredibly rare. For a team that wins by 3 touchdowns, I mean, I don't know how many times that has happened in recent college football history, yet it showed up there. And Iowa State did it. What Iowa State is going to do is they're going to take the air out of the football. And these are going to be two teams that want to play very similarly. They want to not turn the ball over. Nobody wants to turn the ball over. I mean, that goes without saying. Come on, Condon. Give us a little something we don't know. Nobody wants to turn the football over. Breaking news from your boy TC. You know what I'm saying, though. Very much ball control. Make the right plays. Don't take chances. That is the way that both of these teams want to play. With Rocco Beck, their quarterback, looks solid. He was not asked to do a whole lot. Made a touchdown throw into the end zone to one of their young tight ends. He looked pretty good, but he didn't have a whole lot of pressure in his face. He was not out there facing the kind of pressure that I anticipate he's going to see on Saturday. And it's one thing to play UNI. It's another with this rivalry game. Even at home in Jack Trice Stadium, things move up. Now, I anticipate as long as Rocco Beck's not turning the football over and throwing interceptions to the Hawkeyes, we're going to see him the whole time. I do not think that J.J. Cole is going to be the quarterback for Iowa State. He went in there for some snaps. I think this is going to be Rocco Beck's kind of game. The running back spot, they're really good. They're deep and they are talented. From Cartavius Norton to Abu Sama, you might have remembered him from a year ago in the state championship game for Southeast Polk and what he did against the Valley Tigers. He's an incredibly impressive young man. They got a couple of playmakers there. They got good receivers. They didn't get involved a whole lot Saturday. I think you'll see a whole lot more of them involved in this football game. But though Rocco did not make any mistakes for Iowa State last week, he is also not a guy I think that you have to be overly concerned about. That guy is going to be suddenly going to be chucking balls all over the field and balls are going to be going over the defensive backs' heads. I do not think that's going to be. It's going to be a check down Charlie kind of game. Don't make mistakes. The adage in this football game, even last year, even though Iowa finally lost for the first time in 7 seasons, was what happens when you turn it over. Well, Iowa doesn't, and Iowa State was. And it was as simple as that. And Iowa had the bounces go their way from the 18-17 win to a couple other plays. Jack Campbell scoring the touchdown a couple of years ago. Iowa, the way that they've won those football games has been dominating in terms of turnovers. Will that happen again? I have my concerns. We will continue on the conversation. Also take a little bit more of a look here of what is happening with this football team and what we anticipate we are going to see from them going forward here on Locked On Hawkeyes. The rivalry is upon us. Always great talking rivalry football. And what makes a great rivalry? I know for me here in Central Iowa, Iowa State, it's a huge one. For other people, though, it's a little bit different. What makes a rivalry? We'll do that as we continue here. This is the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. Next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can make sure your part fits right the first time around. You just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check mark to know that the part will fit, or your money back, because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligibility items only. Exclusions apply. Trent Condon back with you again here on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. All right. So we look at this football game. We're talking about Iowa State. We're looking at this squad. Offensively, Offensive line, not great. That's good. Defensive line for Iowa needs to play a whole lot better. The defensive line for the Hawkeyes, we need to see more out of this group than what we saw a week ago. Utah State throws it around a bunch. Screen game, they use a ton. And Iowa State is going to do things very similarly to what we saw from the Aggies last week. So you got to be ready for that. The defensive line, and though they graded out incredibly well, they got to be better. And we need to see pressures, and we need to see hands in the face, and we got to see knockdowns, and we need to have those quarterback hurries. That is how Iowa is going to be able to force those turnovers and ultimately how they can win this football game. One other note I want to get into here, and that is what Iowa State did in terms of finally going out and getting a dedicated special teams coach. So for me and what I do here in Central Iowa, host my daily radio show on 106.3 KXNO. And of course, we talk about both teams because of where we are in the market. Now, it's a split. We can argue, is it 60-40? Is it 50-50? You can argue the numbers, but we just know there's a lot of fans on both sides. And so I talk a lot of Iowa State football, and I watch every single week because I have to. Not like you Hawkeye fans out there, and if you don't want to watch the Cyclones, you don't have to. I have to for my job. And during the Matt Campbell era, he has never had a dedicated special teams coach. And it hasn't gone very well. Oh, we mentioned the 18-17 game and the fumbled punt. Two guys running into each other. I mean, still one of the most hilarious plays and the way to cap that one off. They haven't been good. And we'll see. Contreras is their new kicker. He was at Nebraska for the last couple of seasons. He was their kicker 2 seasons ago. He's all right. He's got a strong leg. He's an improvement of what they've had, and certainly what we saw from them a year ago. Punter Perkins is pretty good. Surprised Kirk Ferentz is not excited about another good punter that he'll be facing off against this week, as we laughed about last week with Utah State. But also, they're returning kicks. That's something they didn't do. And those little things, as Iowa's won so many of these close games in recent history against Iowa State. Well, if Iowa State closes the margin, we know in pretty much every game, Iowa has an advantage, and many times a significant advantage in special teams. If that closes up this week, all of a sudden that 18-17 win turns out to be 20-18. All of a sudden, those close victories that have gone Iowa's way in the past, they tilt back the other way. They're okay over there. They have somebody that's actually doing the work. And for them and their perspective, that's a very good thing. Rivalries. I grew up, as I've told many of you before, North Iowa, Osage kid. Grew up, and during the 80s, Iowa State wasn't a thing. And this is not to be flippant or to be an a-hole to Cyclone fans. That's not what this is. This is reality. Back in that time, as Iowa took control of the series in 1983 and ran off the 15 straight wins, during that time period, Iowa State was an afterthought, and certainly Iowa State football. Yeah, Johnny Orr had a couple of good basketball teams, and they go, what was it, back when they played, 14 conference games, they go 6-8 in conference and somehow be an NCAA tournament team. That thing aside, had some good basketball teams, but the Cyclone fandom wasn't big. Now, Ames is closer to Osage than Iowa City is, yet everybody was a Hawkeye fan. 90% of people were Hawkeye fans. That has changed too. That has evolved. And where I am now here in Central Iowa, the rivalry is a whole lot different. But I also need to remind people from outside this area, that's not the case across the state. My wife's from Sioux City. I know that Iowa State, Iowa, is not the rivalry that matters. Over there, you Sioux City people know, it's about Iowa, Nebraska. Where I grew up, it was Iowa, Minnesota. It was playing for the pig. That was more important growing up for me and that matchup than when they played Iowa State in a non-conference game. Plus, we're talking about conference rivalries that take it to another level. If you're in Dubuque, yeah, it's Wisconsin. You're the Quad Cities, it's Illinois. Everybody has something different. Yes, it's an in-state team, but Iowa State is more of a Central Iowa team in comparison to what you see and the statewide coverage we get from the Hawkeyes. The rivalry is different in different spots. But I will tell you, if you're not from Central Iowa, this rivalry is different than anything you could anticipate. And when I moved here back in 2007, I was so surprised about how different this rivalry is here and how it consumes people 24/7, 365. This rivalry is absolutely monstrous for so many people. You want to beat them. You want to beat the loudmouth that's the next office over. You want to beat your buddy that went to Iowa State. You want to beat your sister who happened to make the wrong choice and go to Iowa State. You want to have that part of the rivalry. And that's something we don't get at the same level, I know, with some of the other rivalries. How many people work with a ton of Gopher fans or a ton of Badger fans? Depending on your part, yeah, a few, but we got a ton of them here. And that's what makes this rivalry different. It's different for different people. And I certainly understand. And there is a multitude of people that want to see this rivalry game go away, that they want to see Iowa State be no more. What does Iowa have to gain by playing this game? Now, a couple years ago when game day was in town, pretty much a lot, right? But that is a rarity that happens. Iowa goes out and wins this game this week, 21-10. Does that vault them all of a sudden up into the top 25? Is there one spot out in the AP poll? Is that going to change a lot of people's minds and their perception? Probably not. Good for the state. I hear that a lot. It's good for the state. Well, I get that. I understand it. But do we have to have it every single year? And with 9 conference games, I continue to maintain, I don't want Iowa State to go away forever. I'm not one of those people. I know there's plenty of you out there. I don't want to see that happen. What I would like to see, though, is some kind of hiatus. 2 years on, 2 years off, something like that. So Iowa, again, has the ability to schedule non-conference games against other power competition. And those trips to Arizona and Arizona State, though the games weren't very fun, at least the way they ended out, and certainly the Arizona State game, the trips were fun. Were fun. Had a great time. Going out to Syracuse, going to Pittsburgh. Back in the day when they played Colorado and they played Miami, those kind of games, we don't get them now with the 9-game conference schedule and being locked in to play Iowa State. Get a neutral site game against Notre Dame. How incredible would that be, in the storylines that would be there dating back to the Feigning Irish and all the stories of Iowa Notre Dame games of past? It would be incredible to have that, but we're not able to have it in the here and now. I'm a proponent, keep the game, but not every year. 4 years on, 2 years off, something like that. Just give the flexibility of adding a little bit more variety to the schedule. Now, that also changes with the additions of USC, UCLA, Washington, Oregon. We're going to get a few more of those road trips, and those are going to be fun. And I will tell you, Hawkeye fans, we're going to have some fun road trips together when we get to those. Wrapping things up here is it is rivalry week, and not just on the football side. We got other matchups happening this week, and plus, Iowa ascends to number 1, a number 1 ranking for the Hawkeyes. We do that as we continue Locked On Hawkeyes. Trent Condon back with you one final time on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. College football season is here, and this season Locked On is kicking up our coverage with Locked On College Football Kickoff Live. Each Friday, Locked On will go live from 10 to noon Central Time on every one of our Locked On College YouTube channels. College Football Kickoff Live. It's going to cover everything from playoff implications, big rivalry games, including, of course, this week, and go in depth like only Locked On can, including insight and analysis from our stable of Locked On College hosts covering their team every day. Find Locked On College Football Kickoff Live every Friday from 10 to noon Central Time on any Locked On College YouTube channel, including Locked On Hawkeyes. You won't want to miss it. As we wrap things up here, we continue the conversation about Iowa State, and we move over to the other side. So we got volleyball, we got soccer, we got all the matchups that'll happen here in fall. Of course, it'll lead into the next big CyHawk matchup, and that will be men's basketball, women's basketball, wrestling, and the fight for the trophy. Now, this manufactured trophy that they play for, it doesn't mean anything. I mean, tell me who won the CyHawk overall sports trophy 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 1 year. I mean, come on. Nobody cares. Right? It's something you put out on social media, you pump your chest out a little bit, and that's it. That's all it is. I mean, Iowa State doesn't even have it every sport, right? They're not baseball. They got the bare minimum for a power conference team in terms of sports that they even offer over there. All right, we throw a little shade their way. But, and they don't have field hockey. And that's where we wrap up here. A number 1 ranking for the Iowa field hockey team. They had the win against former number 1 North Carolina a couple of weeks ago. And seeing what we see from the Olympic sports, from the sports that don't get the same kind of notoriety. They're all Hawkeyes. Doesn't matter if it's a cross-country team or the soccer team, the swimming team, and on and on and on. They're all Hawkeyes. And though we don't give a ton of airtime to them and what they're doing, we're definitely keeping an eye on it. We're definitely watching. And seeing that win against North Carolina, was able to catch that on the, ACC Network Plus. It's just really cool. Do I know anything about field hockey? Of course not. I'm from Iowa. We don't have field hockey here. But the way that this program has continued to develop things, it's been absolutely crazy. I mentioned before here on the podcast, my daughter, she's got into softball this year, and she's already asking, when can we go watch the Hawkeyes play softball? They all are due notoriety. And I'll tell you, HawkeyeSports.com, the official website of the Hawkeyes, they really do a great job of putting stories out. So if you want to follow along a little bit more, we know it doesn't get the views, it doesn't get the listens of what football does, what basketball does, even wrestling does. It's different, but just wanted to give a little credit there to the field hockey team and what they have. We got LaShawn Daniels stopping by later in the week. Jace will also be back with us here this season. We were supposed to have him today, but hey, work got in the way. It's going to happen. He's a lawyer. I mean, come on. We got to find time, though, to get him back in here, and we will continue to preview Iowa State. LaShawn and I will make our picks later in the week, and your boy TC got the lead in the early picks brought to you by FanDuel and our season-long competition with me and LaShawn. We'll talk plenty of football as we continue. Enjoy the week. It is CyHawk week. Make that Cyclone fan feel bad, and hopefully the football team will make them feel worse come Saturday at 2:30. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. Go Hawks.